Okay. Hi, everyone. Sami Sweis, Center graduate of 2010. And right now I teach Arabic and Middle East history here at Center College. I'm just about to complete my 4th year. And so I was invited today to talk about 3 books. And I chose 3 books that I've recently read, currently am reading, and then am looking forward to reading shortly. So the first book I'm going to show you is a good proper history book by Elizabeth Thompson. It's How the West Stole Democracy from the Arabs, the Syrian Arab Congress of 1920 and the destruction of its historic liberal Islamic alliance. It's a very wordy title, and it's kind of provocative in terms of how it's titled, but it's actually not as provocative of a book as one would suspect. It deals with the history of a very short-lived government that was created after World War I in the Middle East by the Arabs in Syria, and their capital was Damascus. So it was the Arab Kingdom of Syria. And it was led by this guy, Faisal from Mecca. And my research deals with his broader family. I specifically look at his dad and his older brother. But it's a really interesting book because Elizabeth Thompson, who I'm actually good friends with, this is her 2nd book, but she's very interested in this role and legacy of colonialism in the Middle East. And this short-lived government, and I say short-lived because maybe it lasted 18 months, maybe even less, was this wonderful example of the Arabs who were feeling as though the new world order after World War I and sort of the Paris Peace Conference and kind of the negotiations taking place over the future of the Middle East and Europe was not going to be in their favor, decided to kind of take destiny in their own hands and create a constitutional monarchy in Damascus. And she does this wonderful job kind of looking at all the different key players, their role in Paris at the Paris Peace Conference and negotiations, them returning to Damascus and quickly putting together a government. And then the success of this government is measured not necessarily by how long it lasted. It was taken apart by the French in June of 1921. But she kind of measures the success based on all the different political personalities that were brought together by the Constitution. So as the title kind of explored, liberals and conservatives got behind this Constitution and this government, and even like Islamists, people who perhaps would be less inclined to a secular government, were also on board with Faisal. So it's a great book in terms of just kind of covering this very short history. And she's a very lively writer. And it's maybe not a history book for someone who doesn't have any background on World War I in the Middle East. But if you ever read something like David Fromkin's Peace to End All Peace, this would be like the next book to read to see what's going on with the Arabs right before the full weight of colonialism really hits them. So that was a great book. I read that one recently. It came out a couple years ago. A book that I'm currently reading, and I'm definitely one of those readers that read multiple things at once. And so this one is very thick, and it's actually a series. I brought the series with me. It's called Incerto by Nassim Nicholas Taleb. And it comprised of 4 books. I'm halfway through. Fooled by Randomness, The Black Swan, The Bed of Procrustes, and then Anti-Fragile. And this is one of those books. I'm not a math person, but it's a book about statistics and randomness and how humans deal with understanding uncertainty. And like I said, I'm not a math person. And I remember taking my one statistics class at Center way back, maybe my senior year, just to get it out because I didn't want to take it. And I did not do particularly well. But it's one of these books that he kind of talks about how humans deal with randomness and uncertainty and how we sort of make sense of statistics and what. Anyway, it's one of these books that as you read it, it causes you to see the world differently in random ways. Like, one of the things, for instance, is this notion of, well, the black swan is his term for events that are disproportionate in their impact. But if you have 2 events that can occur at random occurrences at equal rates, but one might have disproportionate impacts. And so an example he gives, and this is very relevant for today, is he talks about like the library of a professor as being composed of 2 types of books. There's the library, which is the books that professors have read. And then there's the anti-library, which is all the books that professors will read. somewhere in one of those books is an idea that will challenge everything a professor knows. And that would be kind of an example of a black swan, where the professor can't expect it, but it's going to have a disproportionate impact on the way he or she thinks. So it's very dense, as you can tell. And there's actually a fifth book that came out that since the time I bought this series, and I'm slowly going through it. I've been working on it probably for a year, just because you can't read it for more than about half an hour at a time. You kind of have to read it, reread it, think about it a little bit. But I've been sort of impressed by how it sort of affected the way I see the world. It's just in these kind of subtle, unexpected ways. And the third book, which I just got about last month, it was just published, I think the end of last year. And I just can't wait to get into it. It's gonna be my fun summer read. And it's the Annotated Arabian Nights. And it's a translation by Yasmine Seale. And so in the last couple years, in all my Middle East themed or Arabic classes, I brought in a lot of Arabian Nights stories, either in translation or for the students to translate, or I've been just lecturing and having students read and discuss how we make sense of these kind of collection of stories. And so I'm very interested in the Arabian Nights as a kind of a corpus of literature. And one of the things that my students always enjoy about the Arabian Nights is that they're not stories for children, even though we tend to associate them with children's stories. But these are like kind of adult, mature stories with very mature themes. And this translation is particularly interesting because the first translation into a European language of the Arabian Nights was in 1714 by a Frenchman named Antoine Guillon from a 14th century Syrian text. And since then, it's been translated into dozens of languages. In English, there's maybe about 6 unique translations. But this is the first in any language of a female translator. And so, it's kind of the last translation in English was maybe about 30 years ago. And so this is the most recent English translation. And it's translated by a female scholar. And what's kind of interesting in terms of the layout is she plays a lot with the text, but then she also includes just these wonderful illustrations or graphics from movies or from other translations and versions that just kind of make it, I think, a much more livelier experience. Because I've read all these stories before, but I'm just sort of interested in how she translates it. And then how she sort of, the explanatory material she puts on the side. It's going to be interesting. I'm hoping in the next year or so to be able to teach a DLM course, like a Doctrina Lux Mentis, for our first year students. That would just be about the Arabian Nights, where we look at all the different translations and sort of see how the Arabian Nights affected Western development, but also how the rest of the world views the Middle East. But yeah, so it's kind of a thick book. Very dense, but beautiful, beautiful book with wonderful illustrations. And this is going to be my summer read. And I can't wait for June in order to really dive into it. And so I'll end there, and I appreciate everyone's attention. Thank you.